To an untrained eye, Splatoon 3 may well look the same as Splatoon 2, and yeah, the gameplay is very similar, from a more casual perspective at the very least. But I want to introduce you to the unsung hero that pushes Splatoon 3's design to new heights the series has never seen before, the UI. I'm going to hold back on going super in-depth and start with the stuff that directly affects every single person who plays this game. I may be in love with the fact the squid cursor now spins around every so often, but you might be a normal person who didn't even care enough to notice. What really matters are the changes that dramatically improve quality of life in-game. Splatoon 3 simply communicates more information to the player, but it's done in subtle ways that don't become overwhelming. For example, check out these new markers indicating where teammates have used specific specials. Knowing that someone nearby is using a crab tank is handy, but knowing where a tacticooler or big bubbler are will be vital in higher level gameplay. I also love the little messages of thanks you get from your teammates when they drink from your tacticooler. Getting a little refreshing message is fun and retains the personality of Splatoon, but it's also super useful for knowing the status of your team.
Another note on Tacticooler is that when you drink one of the sodas, you get a soda icon. This is useful information to know who has gotten one and who hasn't. There is a lot of indicators that make it abundantly clear who has taken a drink, like the small arrow animations you see on your character. And this as well makes game awareness in competitive play more intuitive.
These kinds of improvements make your gameplay experience so much better, and the genius part is they're designed so you barely even notice that's happening. And Splatoon 3 is full of examples of this. Understanding the state of play when it comes to who's alive is so much better. This X animation quickly plays when someone is splattered, which encroaches into your gameplay space just enough that it brings your attention to it without being too distracting. Death markers clearly indicate where a player died, which team they were on, and if it was your teammate or you who splattered them. Each of these have subtly different designs to easily and quickly communicate vital information to the player with zero thoughts needed on their end. Death markers also stick to the sides of the screen now, improving your awareness. When a teammate is killed nearby, there's even an animation to make sure this is brought to your attention. In Splatoon 1 and 2, you could easily be left unaware in a situation like this and play poorly as a result. But Splatoon 3 pushes you to be better and counter bad situations by improving your game awareness.
Something else that is interesting about the Tacticooler, and all the other specials and weapons in general, is the minimalist style icons associated with them. Every special in the game is limited to 1 or 2 colors at most, making most of these feel like logos. Having them as icons is really great for many reasons, but the main reason why it works so well is because of their unique silhouettes. Every special in the game has an icon designed to look like no other. For example, Trizuka and Ink Vacuum point at the same direction, and look very similar, but that extra color on the top of the vacuum really makes it more distinct from a distance, and the silhouette works better because the white circle on top of it is massive. This decision of approaching designs as silhouettes ultimately contribute to that fast-paced gameplay Splatoon is known for, as the icons serve the purpose of making things extremely easy to identify.
The massive list of quality of life changes goes on, including information on all abilities and specials on the map screen, and each ranked mode also has way more care put into their UI design. Rainmaker feels far more complete now. When you pick it up, your weapon and special icons are changed to the Rainmaker, clearly communicating to you how this changes your options, and to every other player who to focus on. Picking up the Rainmaker causing you to lose your special until you either win the game or die always felt a little weird to me, so I like the fact with the checkpoint system there's room to move the Rainmaker forward and then use the special you've charged. There's also a white Rainmaker icon in the center of the screen when you pick it up. I've definitely had situations where I thought I had it but someone nabbed it just before me, so this is a great way to clear up any confusion. Speaking of confusion, it's not always obvious which route you should take in this mode, or where the podium even is when you're new to a certain map, which they've now fixed by making them project Rainmaker icons into the air. They also project these Rainmaker symbols around them, which will always appear over the ink to make sure the podium doesn't blend into the background too much. More podiums in itself could also be a little confusing though, so when the enemy team is pushing, there are indicators on your screen of where the nearby podiums are. Since you're likely looking away from them, this will really help players adjust to new map layouts. They've also changed the score section at the top to now include team colors. If your team color is smaller in the bar, you're losing. It's always good to have simple simple, intuitive ways to communicate the state of play to users like this. Clam Blitz is great because it's the perfect opportunity to turn off the game and go outside instead of playing Splatoon all day long. But if you are bored enough to play this absolute mess of a mode, they have improved visual communication here too, with the icons at the top to tell you how many clams your team are holding, including if they have a power clam. The dots that connect your score to your team's clam count are also smaller for some reason. Aside from that, it's pretty much the same, and I honestly don't think it's enough to fix the communication problems with this mode. I really don't understand why Nintendo didn't add more commands to the D-pad at least, when this graphic is basically screaming at you that there's 2 buttons on the controller that don't do anything.
I like that some parts of the UI have subtle animations in them, like the order gear button, motion control menus, or even the Salmon Run prize menu. The pattern in the back moves almost to drive attention to the prize. It's subtle details like this that keep the game feeling as dynamic as possible.
In all modes, there's an indicator for who is in the lead, whereas this used to tell you which team was in danger. It essentially communicates the exact same thing, but I think the newer system makes more sense. The lead message also shows up throughout the entire game, whereas the danger message would only show up when an active push was happening. In such a fast game, it's good to be communicating who's winning at all times if you don't have time to read all of this information. What's far cooler is the new overtime timer. This used to be pretty vague, but now you're clearly shown how much time is left as color drains from the timer. The color used is that of the team who's currently losing.
The respawn counter also seems to have new animations that indicate when the player will respawn. Having a bar fill up is much more visual than a countdown is. This is especially relevant with Tentacooler once again, as you can see the respawn effects it has in action. And sometimes it can even help you differentiate whether you got splatted by someone with Punisher or not.
I mentioned this in my other Splatoon analysis video, but I really like the 2D assets in this game. The weapons at the top are now all 2D artwork instead of the 3D models that they used to use. This makes the whole HUD far more consistent in my opinion, compared to a mix of 3D and 2D assets in Splatoon 2. And of course, the new wipeout notification is not only a lot of fun and very rewarding, but an extremely important message to players that it's time to push in hard. While any high-ranked player should already understand this in previous games, it certainly is possible to lose track of the UI at the top of the screen when you're focusing on your character, especially for newer players. Now there's no excuse for people not getting on the goddamn tower when the entire team is down. Battles aren't the only place you'll see greatly improved UI though. As a player, your journey into actual gameplay is just as important, and it's clear a ton of effort has been put into both making this stuff cool to look at and intuitive to use. It goes without saying this new lobby is leagues ahead of the previous games, allowing you to do so much more than just stare at an orange screen. You can access your menu from anywhere in the lobby instantly, and when you do, it opens up with this cool animation, which is also used at the start of a news broadcast. In case it's not immediately obvious, this is a reference to an effect CRT TVs can create when turning on and off. This happens because the coils that deflect electrons vertically lose power first, causing the electrons to collapse into a straight line in the center of the screen. It's not something you'd see on a modern TV, but it is a trope I think most people understand to mean a TV turning on and off. And here we have an inky take on that same effect. I really love this animation, it's just such a great idea that's been perfectly executed. Once the menu's open, it looks really cool. Clearly this is designed to look like a modern phone with the notch on the top here. The mode you're currently selecting has this neon outline, which really makes it pop out both in terms of color, but also the depth created by the layers moving forwards. I have to assume the developers were inspired by their work on Octo expansion when they came up with this, because it does look pretty similar. Splatoon 2 really didn't put emphasis on the mode you're selecting other than having it being centered, but that's pushed so much further now. I also want to mention how smartly these modes are all color-coded. Green is more safe and chilled out, which makes a lot of sense for turf war, and orange is a little more intense, while private rooms are purple, which is often associated with luxury or exclusivity. I also love how this tube thing in the back here displays the classic lobby background, which syncs up to the mode you're currently selecting in the menu. In general, it's great how they've implemented the old menus into this new lobby. Seeing everyone's score is no longer an animation with a set amount of time at the end of each match, but something you can look at for as long as you choose between matches. Then you can move on to some practice, or open up the classic lobby menu, again perfectly transitioned over into this new lobby system. I also think it's great the deaths are shown again like in Splatoon 1. This is a a really important stat to know if you're playing well or not, and I think making people aware of if they're helping or spending the entire game respawning will teach everyone to play better. When you open up this menu, the background is blurred to ensure it doesn't distract from important information on the screen, and I love how all of these elements point inward towards your inkling. It creates a composition that leads your eye into the screen. It's also really nice to get a clear view of your inkling. Back in Splatoon 1, they were just kind of discarded and thrown into the corner, which looks a little awkward by today's standard. Also, when this menu starts to load, your special icon fades out just before the UI elements behind it disappears. Interestingly, it leaves a transparent hole in the shape of your special, and the same happens when these elements load in before a match. This wasn't the case in the early turf war footage Nintendo released back in April. As you can see, this UI element is actually different. This is cool because now the special fades into a transparent gap to match the special meter, making the whole thing more consistent. This is the kind of tiny refinement artists behind this game made that, in my opinion, justifies over-analyzing games like this. It takes a million tiny details to make something look professional and fluid, so I really enjoy being able to appreciate the work that most people will never notice. Now, let me show you the single best thing about Splatoon 3. The gear menu is so much faster now, which improves the user experience considerably. In Splatoon 2, it was so slow and annoying that I honestly avoided even opening it. And check it out, you load back in exactly where you left off instead of going to the center of the map. Speaking of the map menu is great too. While mostly the same in terms of functionality, I love how they've really completed the arts and crafts feel of Splatoon with this game's UI. There's no more super clean rounded rectangles with your menu elements, but instead rough shapes that have been crudely cut out and stuck on. Even the map itself is more of a collage that's been stapled into the menu, which both looks cool and is a great solution to summarizing such a huge map in such a small space. Tape creates the arrows explaining what leads to where, and is also used to separate the modes from the shops. Again, in Splatoon 2, this is all just clean, generic UI stuff, which is fine, but Splatoon 3 is overflowing with personality in a series that was already full of it.
Whenever you're presented with an option in Splatoon 3, you may have noticed that the bubbles around them are different from the previous game. I really love how they look now. The shininess feels very organic, and it makes it look like the bubble as a whole is moving. I'm honestly fascinated by how seamless the designers do things like this. Even when you hover over the option and it creates a splat, the movement still continues. I like that the majority of the option menus have these backgrounds made up of stickers and cool little designs. They give every menu so much personality, and continue the consistent look and feel of the game. The menu that lets you navigate the different parts of the game have those textures as well. The catalog button even has the little bicycle riding fish from the Return of the Mammalians trailer. I love how they treated the top of the menu as well. They made the backgrounds of the designs noisy while keeping the stickers clean. And every section has an icon now, which is really cool. The fact that the designers went as far as to give these tiny little icons texture just demonstrates how much care was put into the UI.
I also really like how these menu options are all slanted, and when you highlight them they slant in the other direction. The bright yellow color really couldn't stand out more from the gray elements, so it's clear which option you're selecting. The same can mostly be said for the gear menu, and I really love how tape is used at the bottom here to help divide these menu elements from these ones. As always though, the UI elements aren't too unrealistically perfect, so it's creased where it hasn't been stuck down properly. Let's talk about something else that's genius because by design you'd never normally see it. Having a player be able to see what they're doing in a game isn't always as straightforward as you might think at first. As soon as walls, other players, or any solid object is introduced, it can really mess up your camera and make a game almost unplayable if a developer doesn't work to fix this in a seamless way. Like in many games, Splatoon will either make your character or the object in front of you transparent to ensure that you can always see what's happening. When the camera is forced against a wall, it will raise just a little to make sure you can see past the character model, and objects that are clearly going to get in the way, like these inflatable things, will turn transparent to make sure you can see through them. This game is so fast, this is the kind of thing you'd probably never notice in normal gameplay, but when you stop to take a look at it, it's a really interesting effect. There's also the fact you always have to be able to see where you're aiming, and so if the cursor touches the inkling will become transparent. However, there's a huge problem with this, because Splatoon has a design element that requires you to be able to see your inkling at all times. In situations where the ink tank would become hard to see, your character turns transparent with the ink tank still visible. The design is simplified here, showing only a silhouette of how much ink you have left. In terms of UI, the ink tank is mostly the same, so I won't spend too much time on it, but did you notice when it follows the player it actually has its own momentum and will overshoot a little when the inkling's direction suddenly changes. Small details like this are great for making the whole experience feel more smooth. In my previous breakdown of the Splatoon 3 gameplay trailer, I mentioned the new loading icon, but it turns out the old 2D animation from Splatoon 2 is still here as well, with updated colors. Much cooler though is the new animation that represents when data is being saved. I liked the old animation a lot, but now they've taken the same concept and turned it into a 3. Very clever. And oh my god, you guys, the conversation tech in Splatoon 3 is so well planned out. Here's the thing, text boxes suck. They're tedious and boring, but if you're not a native speaker of Squid, then you're probably going to need a visual aid to understand what's going on here. Rather than simple text boxes that flick through one at a time, Splatoon uses a more dynamic approach, where multiple characters can speak at once. Notice how Big Man speaks on the right side of the screen here, representing his location in comparison to Fry, who just spoke. When the camera moves to focus on Big Man, he continues to speak on the right side before Shiva replies to him off screen, with her text on the left, again representing her location in comparison to Big Man. This allows for a more dynamic back and forth between characters, whether you can currently see them or not, and feels so much more fluid than the traditional one block of text at a time. I can't wait to talk about how the Inklings have been fundamentally changed in Splatoon 3, introducing brand new hair physics and how small changes have made controlling them feel so much smoother, but that's going to have to wait until a future video. For now, make sure you go to the Splatoon 3 analysis playlist. Did you know that the shops in Splatoon 3 are so well planned out that Mr. Coco's shirt is consistent with real streetwear printing methods? Check out Deku Gamer's video for more details like this that you've never noticed before. And if you want to improve your art for free, you can join the Learning to Draw Discord server. Follow me on Twitter and Instagram, and that's it for now, so thank you for watching, and goodbye.